What's interesting with animation is that it's changing at any given moment. You can change that relationship. And it's important to control this focus of attention because animation goes at 24 frames a second. You can draw 24 drawings in a second. There's a huge amount of information. It's a very dense medium. And you have to simplify it so that it's clear. I always say that animation is like poster art. It needs to be read instantly. It has to be designed to be very legible. You can see that the sand has some texture because there's reflected light on the sides from the light box. And depending on what your exposure is, you can eliminate those or work with those. Now the big rule when you're working under the camera and animating is to always redraw an image before you erase it, because otherwise, that's how to keep track and how to keep the figure consistent. So my way, if I shoot 2 frames of the goose, who's going to move this way, then I redraw her by doing this. So maybe first her neck moves out and her leg will move up as she starts to take a sideways step. And I've decided that this is the amount that her head's going to move, and her body will just slightly tilt, but not much. And her leg go up a little bit. And then I redraw in the direction that I'm making the movement, and I wipe away the sand in behind by the same amount. And I push on her eye. It's going over by the same amount. And then I shove the sand into that shape. And wipe away Okay, so this, she's starting to go that way. So I would shoot 2 frames of her like this, click, click, and then this time her whole body will move. And she's speeding up a bit, so I make a bigger increment. I find that eyes for people are just generally very important. I feel that there's a lot of expression that you can have in the eyes. It's not just the eye, you need probably the eyebrow or something around the eye as well so that you can give emotion and feeling. I probably haven't planned precisely what the speed would be, but I decide according to the size and the frame, I guess, what the increment would be. I sort of know how large an increment will seem like a very fast movement. It's not really exact how I do it. Once I start a film at one scale, I continue it. With the sand, it's probably about like this. With very fine sand, you could work smaller, maybe a little bit. On this plexiglass, it's jumping around a bit. And when I work on white glass, it seems to give a sharper line. It's a little bit more in control. But I always use my fingers and the pipe cleaner. The pipe cleaner is to make lines inside the shape. When I was working with Peter and the Wolf, I was just concerned with these black and white shapes in the silhouette. Then I began, by the time I did the Kafka film, I started to play with the density of the sand, because it's actually translucent material. I did the owl's feathers by pressing like this. And you can do nice textures if you blow on it. I learned that her wings could be like this, or I started to use things like a fork. Terrible sound, but you can get interesting textures, and also blow those, or the comb. In the Kafka film, I used this stamp to make wallpaper textures. But I think you could press coins in. You could do a lot of things, and you can make movement. I could animate this shape to suggest the inside of the beetle, his humanity. In the scene where he's rocking at the window back and forth. You've seen the film, so you might remember. And there's rain coming down. The rain, I thought, would suggest his sadness or his tears, loneliness. There's a quick little shot of him in an armchair smoking. This is something very human to do. I show that he's drawn to music. The violin that his sister plays at the end pulls him towards the door. And these are all details that were in the Kafka story, but I reshuffled them and gave them a different emphasis. My last shot of the film, actually, I tried visually to show the exterior of the beetle, pan around these rather hideous legs, but we come into a human ear, and I wanted, in that way, visually to show the two parts of this beetle, his human side and his monster side. In The Owl Who Married a Goose, the geese fly into a lake. Then they come to at night a lake, which is down below, and then the lake gets larger and larger and larger, and it fills the screen and becomes the night. And then it's beautiful, the kind of transparencies that you get. And then the geese land, and so I'll do a goose then in the pond. I guess I could try to do an eye. Hard. It is hard to get little details. some more. One thing is, I see how the light, the white from my shirt is affecting, look how black it is until I come close. I always wear a black t-shirt when I'm animating, and I'm always careful to, I click the camera and step away as I'm shooting a frame so that the light is always consistent around, because this is very sensitive. Even my hand being near changes the light, and you can control it so that you see this texture if you want. I always shoot a Cinex before I start anything with a camera setup, so that I get the light just the way I want it. You know, I shoot f-stops, probably on half stops or even quarter stops, and I shoot them maybe about 20 frames of each exposure, so I have about a second, so I can choose my correct exposure when I see it projected, as well as looking at it on the light box to try to get the density that I like. So if she's swimming this way, it's the same procedure. The sand also goes everywhere, so it's good to work with a camera that has a remote control and keep your fingers away from the equipment. Yeah, and so the water might have gone up like, you know, I play with the white and the dark. It might have started to splash like that. As I pay attention to getting the shape right, and then when I set them in motion, I try to keep that shape in balance. And that seems to me like a good rule for making believable looking movement.
하늘길 계속 따라가면 하늘길 있어 따라가면 하늘길 거기서 따라가면 하늘길 하늘길
I work just with top lighting and no underneath lighting, but you could work with transparent colors, and that would be just fine on a table like this. And I make a palette of my colors usually around my frame, which is here, and I've taped it off. This is about the size I usually work. And I've mixed a little bit of glycerin in with the paint. I prepared this before, and it's really not a lot of glycerin or color flecks. That's I think it's a medium light glycerin that's used by cell painters to keep the paint from cracking on the cells. And I found that if I stir repeatedly and I prepare the colors a bit before I'm ready to work, sometimes they never dry out at all. Here's the black. This green has actually been wet like this for quite a while, and the black since yesterday. I use black ink because it's the blackest black that I've found. And okay, so I use my fingers as my tools. So I'll do a little boy's head. I use the, usually I have little drawings too of the scenes that I'm working on the side to refer to. I feel I have more control with my fingers, and I do use this. This happens to be a pencil, but usually I would use a wood stick. The pencil seems fine to get details in the face. And I use a wet cloth to wipe up. Oh, this kid's rather cross-eyed. The glass that I usually use is called flashed opal. It's regular, like window pane glass, but one side of it has been has a very thin coating of white, and the glass is somehow much nicer to work with than plexiglass. Plexiglass gets scratched for one thing, and glass doesn't. Plexiglass also stains some of the colors. Like there's some blues that that would stain the plexiglass. Okay, so if this is the face, I follow the same rule that I would with the sand animation, which is that I redraw the image before I erase the old one. So I'm going to move this, turn this face this way, and what I would do then would be retrace the image. So I'm moving it over. Unless there's a really strong discrepancy, but also here I'm working faster than I would normally, and I'd be more careful, I think. So you see I'm moving, the whole head is shifting by the same amount. Everything shifts. So I really redraw the whole image. If something goes really wrong, and I change my mind, I can make a cut where there's a lot happening in the scene and you wouldn't notice it. But it's hard to match up something that's not moving very much. So my films, which look like the street, which might look continuous, they do have cuts. Even just when I'm unloading the camera after a couple of weeks of work and I want to see my rushes, I do it in a place where there's a lot happening, so that discrepancies in the just the processing from the lab wouldn't be noticeable.
In the bedroom.
Timing changes.
You better not go in.
I want to see her.
Don't come in here.
Sometimes I make little notes so that I know, like here, maybe the head has come in from the right, and each time I make a move afterwards, I mark how it's come in, so I know that it's getting faster and faster here. See? So I'd know if I go away and come back, or if it's a complicated move and it's taking a couple of days, just so that I have a record of where I've come from, so that I know where I'm going to. I can make little marks. And also sometimes to keep track of the size, because if you work closely with something, you kind of get blind to some rather obvious things. I mean, I might be paying attention to the expression and not notice that the head is getting smaller, so I might mark while I'm working on this head, if it's supposed to stay the same size, that it's within this area. So those are little tricks to help with the continuity and keep things consistent. I did have an experience once. I was working on the street. That scene where
Exactly how you feel.
the
Dr.
uncle
Kristen said.
and the father or the rabbi step outside, and they step outside, and I wiped them out to white, and I went away for a long weekend, and I came back and I couldn't remember where they'd been or what they really looked like. So I learned after that to be more careful and make these marks for myself.
So long. It's amazing. The mysteries of the human heart.
Of course, it's a choice now whether I want to leave these trailings or clean them up. But that's part of the handcrafted look, I think.
After she dies, her hair will go on growing for another 24 hours. Says who? Duddy Kravitz. Do you think Uncle Lou will come from New York for the funeral? I suppose so. Boy, that means another $5 for me. Even more for you. Dreams. Hey, let's talk some more.
Did you know that when they hang a man, the last thing that happens is he has an orgasm?
A what?
Skip it. I forgot you were still in kindergarten.
Ah, kiss my Royal Canadian.
V, are we still flying here?
Yeah.
In the sequence of interview, towards the end, there's a party scene, and I used photographs, Xerox heads of my friend Veronica and me, and I glued them onto cell, and then covered them with cell, or I guess maybe I had some adhesive materials just so that they wouldn't get dirty. And then I found that if I put a little bit of color flecks on the back, it holds remarkably onto the glass. And I used the technique that I used and that I've shown you for the street, my normal working on glass technique. Well, this isn't holding so well, but basically the idea is the same. I move the paint on glass, which is this black shape. In interview, I gave us each new bodies, and that was fun. And then I can move the head independently. And of course, you know, remember how I work with the paint. Don't know. I redraw the image. I gave myself a little floating body, and I'm moving off to the left. And I'll raise the hand a bit more. And then I fill it in. And you have Xerox machines probably that make enlargements and reductions, and there's a lot you can do with that. It doesn't have to be a head, but it gives a chance to add to the painted world that you're working with, or that anyway I was working with, some photographic images. And of course, with interview, there were a lot of colors, so it was quite complicated, that scene. But there, that's the little body moved over, and then I moved the head to keep up with it. And the head can turn, and the body can stay still. So cutouts are actually quite fast to work with.
My films begin in the dark, like a mystery novel. The pieces fit together at different times for different people.
Well, Interview had a lot of input from Veronica, and she does do cutout work. And I knew that I wanted to do something using photographic faces, but I wanted the same smooth animation that I can get with the paint-on-glass technique. So that's why I put the two together.
Your films are like the night, and my films are like the day.
I make my films very clear because I want them to be understood. I was with Anna. We were both pregnant. She was more pregnant than I was. What a funny dream. We were kissing each other. Our stomachs were in the way. I was very warm and close to her.
Veronica, you weren't listening.
I'm not listening to you. I know I'm not listening.
His hat blew off and his beard caught. He ripped apart at the jacket seams and started losing his other extremes. Then all the rest of him blew away. Oh, things get rough on no windy day. Oh, things get rough on no windy day.
Out from the lab actually shows you how wide the frame line is. And so I just draw a line in the middle between the fourth and the fifth sprocket hole, and I know that that's pretty good. And then I would tell you to make your first frame like this, with a big X. And this is your 0 frame. We were doing some sync sound, so it was important to make a frame count. And when I make a frame count, I can make little notes for myself in the side of the film like this, if I want to number things. I don't think you need to do that, but it's good to X your beginning, and then we splice it out when we're joining things together. I take my blade. And I measure off 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and draw a line through the center. And I do that for a bunch of frames. And it's very important that it's 4 and that you don't miscount and make 5, because then the frame line will shift on the image of the editing machine. To animate, I would suggest that you eyeball your registration. And you can move quite quickly. I was doing that here. Sometimes I make a tiny little mark in the very middle, and I sort of imagine a grid for myself. And I look at this and I see it's across from that sprocket hole, and so I'll, and it's moving down like that. And I would advise you actually to scratch every other frame. It'll go faster. But there's another system if you want to do a little bit more precise registration. This is a system that was given to me by Pierre Hébert, and he was working with an Academy aperture, which you can ignore. It leaves room for the soundtrack on the side, and this machine here reads the whole frame, so just ignore the little square. But I drew a caret on that frame, and if I wanted to repeat the caret for a few frames, I could lay this down, line up the sprocket holes, which are hard to see on this film, but easier on yours because they have black around them. And then just punch out the key points, which might be these. And so, in fact, I know Pierre Hébert, who works at the film board, often does his whole animation on paper like this, and then punches it through onto the film. So, see, I've made these little punch holes, and presumably this shape will be in the same place if I've registered it correctly. But I really think that just eyeballing it and moving along pretty quickly is as good.
Thank you, Marie.
Sandpaper, useful. You can do some nice scratching. I'm just protecting the frame before and the frame after. And then you can draw, or you could draw something in it and scratch it a bit more. Or put a twist on the scratch. Now this one I'll do vertically. And you'll find here there's a little bit of dirt underneath, and it's causing a design to happen. And I was rubbing the other day a coin and got an image. So you can get textures like this. So this is moving around very fast. That would look nice. And we have some transparent inks here. You could scratch out an area of white, and then there's only one brush, but you might have some other brushes. You can add color to the emulsion side or the base side, and then scrape away, and you have a possibility then of 3 colors.
This is Viola Shea.
I've read everything you've written. Everything. Every word. Every word.
I would say that the beauty of drawing or scratching directly onto film is that it's a world of strict limits, and your challenge is to see how much you can say within those limits. And I think all art works with a balance between limits and freedom. Your tools when you're scratching or drawing are just limited imagery, motion, rhythm, and color. What you know about drawing or painting and working in other mediums really won't help you very much. It's like being a child again. But as I say, the sophistication is in what you can do with those limits.
Thank you.
Go.
I know that I'm not making films for a mass audience anyway, or I wouldn't be looking at Jean Genet and Kafka. So I see myself as my audience. I hope that my films are around for a good long while. And animation doesn't date, really, doesn't get outdated. If you saw my film, The Owl Who Married a Goose, it seems still pertinent today. I think my style that I've evolved is pretty personal and doesn't have any, really very much, it doesn't have references to anything else, so no one could date it or place it. You can't say it looks like 50s or 60s or 80s art, really.